All right, so as you know, there's a final project requirement at the end of the semester, and this document tries to capture the generic requirements that that everyone has to meet. So each one of you will join a team of three, at most three. It could be smaller, but it's the same requirements for everybody, regardless of the size, the final result of the size of the team. So these are very generic. You can really build anything you want. Ideally, 80 or 90% of you will fit within the constraints of this project, but of these requirements. But if you feel that you want to go beyond or do something totally different, we'll certainly consider that, as long as the effort and the complexity is comparable. Also, if you feel that there are certain features that you might prefer to provide other than the ones that are required here, we can certainly negotiate, as long as it's within the comparable complexity. All right. So the idea would be that you will identify some third-party API that has some real data, some real live data, and that you would build around that API some application to be able to interact with this data. You would have a local database of your own that would allow you to augment whatever use cases that third-party API does not provide. You would be merging together the data that you're receiving from the remote API with your own data from your own API from your own database. Right? So here's an example of what the navigation might be. Ideally, anybody should be able to use your application and without having to log in. So ideally, they would be able to use, or maybe most of the application without having to identify themselves. So if we don't know who you are, the content might be fairly generic for you as you as you come into the home page and navigate through the data set. Only when it's absolutely necessary, the application should ask you to identify who you are. So here in the home, there would be two versions. One would be the anonymous content. As you log in, we don't know who you are. We'll show you some anonymous content. Once you log in and we know who you are, the content would be specific to you, right? Perhaps the latest content that you've generated, or the latest reviews, or the latest comments, or the latest whatever would be targeted specific to you. It should provide some mechanism for retrieving data from the remote API, some search feature that it could be several drop downs. It could be just one single input field, or however you want to make it so that it would be searching through some criteria, whatever the third-party API is, and the results from that search would be some summarized result set, right? Where it may be some aggregate results that might provide multiple records that match your particular criteria in a summarized format, and then you could perhaps be able to click on any one of these elements and then navigate to a details page that would contain much more detail about whatever it is that you clicked on, right? So for instance, you have some kind of search form and some list of summarized results and links. You could merge the search as part of the home if you prefer, where you do the search maybe on the home, and then that navigates to a result set, perhaps, if you prefer merging some of these together. I'm displaying them here as separate boxes, as separate rectangles, but certainly some of these features could be implemented as a single page. Once you click on the details, the search comes from the server, from a remote API. When you click on the details, that detail also comes from the remote API, right? Where usually APIs will have queries for being able to come back with a collection of things that match a particular criteria. and they'll have a different API that will allow you to retrieve specific detailed information about one particular item, right? And where if you in that second API, probably they'll come back with much more information about that particular item, right? So if you're searching Best Buy for televisions, that it'll come maybe only the price, it'll come maybe the vendor, maybe an image or so, and maybe a one-line text description, plus some unique identifier. Typically, that unique identifier can then be used for asking for more information about a specific TV, and then it will come back with lots of pictures and lots of information about that one television, with reviews and a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's what the details page might show, detailed information about that particular item. The details page will be a mix of content that is generated dynamically from data from a third-party API, plus a mixture of data that comes from the local API, from your own database. For instance, some folks might have reviewed that television set, or that movie, or that recipe, or has something to say about a sports team, or whatever your domain you choose. So that information will live in your local database. Folks that have visited that same item and have something to say, right, about that particular item. So that will live in your database, right? Folks that have reviewed, or like, or don't like, or have commented, or whatever, right? So that this page, the details page, will be a mixture of both remote content and data from your local content. Okay. Now from your local content, you can perhaps navigate to folks who have something to say, people that like this item or don't like this item or have commented on this item. You can navigate to their profile, right, to a public profile, to see, to learn more about you, right? So maybe some social networking features, right? This profile will be a public profile that might hide some of the things that are personal to us. Maybe won't show my email, won't show my phone number, won't show any private information, but it'll show some public public persona. Hide the private details. This profile page is the same profile page that you can navigate from within. Maybe I'm a friend, or maybe I'm following you, and because I'm following you and you have accepted my invitation, when I navigate to your profile, maybe it's a little more public, right? Or maybe you're sharing a couple more things that you wouldn't share with folks that are anonymous. Okay, maybe not the full information, but maybe a little more. All right. Notice that they're mapped to two different. The mapping is /profile/user ID, meaning I can navigate to somebody else's profile if I provide the ID of whoever I'm navigating to. But then I have my own profile. Notice that my own profile says /profile, meaning I don't need to provide the ID because it's me. I'm logged in. You know who I am, right? The state information of knowing who currently is logged in is maintained on the server for security purposes, right? We don't necessarily divulge any private information, including my user ID, and so this would be a state management on the server, so that come back with information about the current person who's logged in. Right? So in my profile page, I do have access to all my private information. I can edit everything. I can change my addresses, my phone numbers, my LinkedIn. I can change anything, right, and update that. Also, from my profile, I should be able to see anything and everything that is related to me. Right? I should be able to see, any comments I've made. I should be able to go and edit them from my profile. I should be able to navigate to all my favorite sports teams. I should be able to navigate from my profile, see everything that I've liked, disliked, anybody who I'm following, anybody who's following me. Right? Anything that is related to me should be accessible from my profile. Okay. My personal profile is only available if I log in, obviously. So there's a login and there's also a registration page that allows me to identify myself. Once I log in or register, I'm considered to be logged in and navigate to my profile, so I can start interacting with my profile and navigate to everything that I have that's related to me. Or from my homepage, I can also navigate to my profile if I am already logged in. Okay. All right. Okay. So that's the requirement for and again, if what you want to do doesn't fit into this, please let me know, and we can negotiate, or we can think of something else. I would imagine that most 80 to 90% hopefully will fit into this schema. If it fits into the schema, if it fits into these requirements, you don't need to ask me for any permission. You can go ahead and build whatever you want, right? As long as you're within these constraints. If you do fall outside of these constraints, then yes, talk to me, and then we can discuss it. So the homepage requirements, again, this kind of repeats a little bit of what I said. It must be mapped to either the root / or /home. So that's the landing page. Must be the first page, must display some generic if you're an anonymous user, or some specific content for if you're logged in. Must display specific content. Must be clear. If I come to your homepage, I should understand what is it about. Okay. If you're Google and you have just a search bar, well, you're Google. Everybody knows what you're asking me to do. Okay. But until you're not Google, I'll need some clue on what is it that you want me to do. Right? So it should be clear what the website is about, right? What the web page is about, what the application is about. Yes. Let's see. So in the profile page, pretty much what I mentioned earlier, must allow users to change their personal information. This should be accessible to other users, including anonymous users, but it'll hide private information. Right? It'll have a public persona. Must hide personal. It must be mapped to /profile. So that will to navigate to my own profile. If I'm navigating to somebody else's profile, it'll be /profile / whatever the unique identifier of that other folk. Must group similar related data into distinguishable groups. So for instance, everybody who I'm following should be under a section called following. Everybody who is following me should be under following me or something. Or my favorite sports, my favorite recipes, my favorite whatever, movies, songs, etc. should be under favorites. Right? So it should be clear that it's grouped. Must display. So the content that is related to me doesn't necessarily have to live in the profile, right? So, but you could provide some links that will allow me to navigate to my favorite movie, right? So that if I click on that link, I go to a details page, and in the details page, I can then see again the details of that movie, right? But it should be that the link should have maybe the name of the movie, perhaps, or maybe a thumbnail, right? And some minor information in there. Snippets if the users. So for instance, so here's some examples that if user is following another user, then other users must be listed. If a user has bookmarked something, then those need to be listed. If the user has commented or reviewed or created some content whatsoever, it should be accessible through here, right? And I should be able to edit it. Any content that I've created, I should be able to remove it or edit it. Okay. Right, the search and search results page requirements. As I mentioned earlier, there has to be some third-party API with real data. Right, real data that you can query and return and dynamically render this content locally. How you want to display it, it's up to you. But at a minimum, it should have just a summary result of the first 10 or 20 results that match your criteria, and be able to do some really, really simple pagination, as in, give me the next 10, give me the next 10, and so on and so forth. Some students like to play around with infinite scrolling. That as you scroll, you keep loading more content. Sure, it's not required, but it's pretty cool. Some folks, most people just do some simple pagination and just go next, 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 and then or backwards. But if you want to play around with infinite scrolling, go ahead. So must provide some form where I can hit some remote API. Must provide some navigation that allows me to navigate to the details page. It must be mapped to a search page, to a /search. If I navigate to a search page and I have results, one of the tricky things to do is for the client to maintain state of that search. Meaning, if I refresh the page, what happens most is that the page is blank, right? Because you've gone out to a service, you've retrieved some data in JSON, it's represented in memory. You dynamically render the content. When you refresh the page, you lose that memory. Okay, so there needs to be some state maintained on the client, enough to be able to reproduce and survive a refresh. Okay, there's a couple ways of doing it, but the most common way is to encode in the URL enough information that you could regenerate the content. Right? So, for instance, if you search for a movie, say search for Batman, then the URL would be encoded that the search was that I searched for Batman, so that if I do refresh the page, I would redo the search to the remote service, come back with it, and I would re-render the page, so I can survive a refresh. Yes, right. So same thing with logging in and whatnot. Oftentimes it happens that folks are doing this only on the client, and they log in. JSON and JavaScript remember that you've logged in, and it's behaving as if you logged in. And when you do a refresh, all that is gone, and you're not logged in anymore. So be careful, right? So it has to survive a refresh. Your applications need to be able to survive a refresh. Same thing with back buttons or forward buttons, right? So for instance, if I go back, say I navigate to a details page, yes? I search for Batman, and I have 10 titles with Batman in it. Batman Begins, Batman Returns, blah, 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 blah. And I click on one of them, and I go to a details page for Batman. If I click on Return, right, my back button, it should display the same query that I just had just a minute ago. Right, so it needs to be able to survive refreshes and be able to survive backwards and forwards. So state management, and we'll learn how to do that, but it needs to be able to do that. So here's an example, right? That you need to encode in the URL, right? Enough information that you can regenerate the page. Right? Ideally, I should be able to copy that URL, send it to someone else. They click on it, and they see exactly what I see. Right? It should be robust enough to be able to maintain state in the URL. The details page. So in the details page, it should navigate to a remote API, retrieve the details, render it, and then be a mixture of remote content plus some content rendered from your own API. Login and registration. Only when it's absolutely necessary would you be required to log in. Most of the application should be accessible to anyone. I understand that there might be some edge cases, some applications that do not make sense for folks to be able to navigate anywhere they want. Oftentimes these folks are using either like banking applications or stocks, or they're using some financial kind of applications where there's a lot of there's too much private information that you don't want to divulge. You can always find something that could be publicly, that it's not personal to anyone, right? That you can navigate through all sorts of stocks without having to deal with any one particular person. So there should be some feature that is always accessible to anyone, right? Without forcing them to log in. Styling. So it has to be responsive. So the TAs are going to constantly, resize the window of the browser and make sure that at any point, right, at any width, the application is still usable. It still looks fine. That you don't have any weird wrapping or some elements that occluding other elements, or pushing some other elements out of the window, or that things are not wrapping weird. So make sure that if things are wrapping, is because you intended them to wrap. Okay, not that ooh, I didn't check it at that particular size, right? Always make sure that you're resizing your window, making sure that your application looks acceptable at every width. Also, make sure to make use of good white spaces. Don't have things that are flush on one to another. Make sure you have consistent padding, that you have consistent margins. Also that you use a color scheme that has a good contrast. That you're not having dark colors in the background and then dark colors in the front and you can't read it. So some obviously make sure you have consistent look and feel, that you're not using one font over here, another font over there, different sizes here and there. Consistency. Right? So it has to look spectacular. All right. Also, as we'll see a little later, scroll bars. Careful with scroll bars. You should avoid having like scroll bars embedded inside of other scroll bars, especially in smaller screens. That typically you only are scrolling up and down. That you're not forcing folks to scroll left and right. That if the content is too big to fit, then either resize it or provide scrolling on demand. Right, but it's not forcing the rest of the content to be scrolled left and right. For instance, some tables might be too big, and maybe those could be scrollable, right? From left to right, but they're not forcing the rest of the page to be scrolled from left to right. Make sense? Right. So be careful with that. We'll see how to implement responsive tables. CSS library. So you can use either Bootstrap or materials or some other, but do not use, don't purchase a style sheet, right? Just use the libraries that we've talked about in class. White spacing, make sure that you handle padding, margin, justification. Justification, make sure that different content is justified correctly. Just text is justified left, that numbers are justified right. And that you have a consistent consistent use of either whether it's currency or how many digits, how many digits are you showing, precision. If it's a currency, make sure that you have a currency symbol. Don't use a centering only when it looks okay. I've seen a lot of applications where everything's centered. It looks awful. So make sure you use centering appropriately. What else? Contrast. Make sure that you have good contrast. Label requirements. So make sure that everything's labeled. Either with a placeholder or with an actual label at the top, and that if you especially on phones, right? If you click on the label, that the input fields are also have focus. Consistency, user requirements, navigating between must be clearly marked. Yep, right. Make sure that when I navigate, oftentimes folks forget about how do I navigate home, and oftentimes it's the logo. Right? If you click on the logo, it navigates home, but it's not clear, right? It's not obvious, right? I mean, I've seen it so many times that now it's obvious, but it should be obvious. How do I go back to the beginning? Right, so provide some clear mechanisms on how do I navigate to different places. Also, I've seen many times that they have these nice little big grids of content and whatnot, and then when to navigate to the details, you have to click on this little tiny link to navigate to the details. I mean, use as much area, the clickable area, to make it as simple for folks to navigate, between different pages. Right? Maybe make the entire cell clickable, right? Especially on small screens. Don't force folks to be poking, at small clickable areas. Errors must be clearly marked, and what to do about them. How do I fix it? What did I do wrong? If there's some field that I missed, make sure that you clearly demark it and tell me what I need to put in there. Architectural requirements. So no global variables, no global functions. Make use of iffy statements if you need to, or modules or classes or imports. Whatever you're using. If you're free to use either React in the front end, or use Angular. So you can mix and match the different technologies that we are using, right? So we're using front end, React and Angular a little later. In the middle tier, we're using Java first, and then Node.js and Express, and later we're using MySQL and Mongo. You can mix and match. Right? You can choose maybe Angular in the front end, Java in the middle tier, and Mongo in the database, or any which way you want. Okay. But the content needs to be dynamic, meaning single page applications. You have to make use of the good practices that we're looking in class of that components have are self-contained. They're modular. They deal with a particular concern, right? So controllers deal with handling events. Services deal with communicating with the server. Web services deal with mapping HTTP to some object-oriented data, and then you have repositories dealing with data access and whatnot, right? So each layer has to be distinctly has to be distinct, right, in dealing with the specific concern. State. Avoid maintaining any state or temporary variables in the client. Web service client, file structure. We've been using a particular file structure all throughout the semester. Keep using the file structure that we suggest. If you have a better one that you've grabbed from work, then use that instead. Also, we were using a particular naming convention for all the files and the components. Follow that unless you have a better one. User requirements. So you have to have at least 2 human users that are going to be using your application, and they have to be distinct types of users. It could be a faculty and a student, right? It could be a buyer and a seller, right? Whatever. It could be a book author and a book critic. Whatever, right? It could be a movie actor and fans. Whatever you choose, okay. But there has to be 2 distinct types of users, so distinct that each one should have its own set of use cases, its own set of pages that are specific to them, right? Or certain functionalities that are only specific to that particular role. Okay. So if I'm a seller, I can create products. I can change their prices. I can change their descriptions. Right, I can change inventory. If I'm a buyer, I can review them. I can add them to shopping carts. I can create orders and whatnot. Right, it's the same data, but we have completely different use cases. Yes, it is okay for one person to have different roles. Right, so I could be a buyer and I could be a seller. Right, but each role has to be distinct. Right, and have its own set of use cases and functional requirements. Anonymous. Oh, also you'll need those are two types of users. You have two types of users plus an anonymous user. The anonymous user meaning I don't know who you are. I still allow you to do things, right? So. Yeah, a guest user. Yeah, not logged in. Yes, I don't know who you are. I don't know. There used to be. I don't know if I removed that last semester. If there's any admin user requirements, I guess I removed it. User roles, navigation. For instance, admin users might have access to. Must allow choose a alternative. Provide an admin role, an admin page that allows configuring user roles. Yeah, I removed admin as a requirement. Yeah. Let's see what else. System, CSS, architecture requirements, anonymous, web services. All your web services have to follow good practice RESTful web services, meaning if you're creating something, it needs to be a post. If you're deleting, it's a delete. If you're retrieving, it's a get. If you're modifying something, it's a put. Also, the REST web services need to be the syntax of your REST URLs need to follow a specific syntax, right? They should all be nouns, no verbs. They should be plurals. They should provide a path that maps to the relationships, the one-to-many relationship between the entities. So it's RESTful services. Database requirements. So you must have a database. Whether it's relational or non-relational, that's up to you. You can choose either one. Data model requirements. The API should provide standard CRUD. Right, so the API, all right, so it should provide CRUD operations. Create. These are the most common types of operations on any data model. So if you have orders or sports teams or recipes or whatever your data model is, you should be able to create one. You should be able to retrieve all of them, retrieve one, retrieve by some criteria. Then you should be able to edit one, update one, and delete one. Right? Complex data model complexity. You should have at least 2 domain objects. At least 2 domain objects. Okay, domain object is an object based on your domain. Whatever you choose. So there might be a team, a song, a movie. Those are all objects specific to different domains. Yes, you should have at least 2. You can have more. And you might need more. So yeah, 2 domain objects, 2 user models, because there are 2 types of users. At least one one-to-many relationship. At least one one-to-many relationship, right? Maybe like a playlist contains many songs, where a playlist is a domain object and a song is a domain object. Yes? And there's a one-to-many. One playlist contains many songs. At least one many-to-many. At least one many-to-many. As in, a student is enrolled in many sections, and a section can have many students. Or an actor acts in many movies, but one movie has many actors. So you can have many-to-many. At least, well, this is if you're using a non-relational database. If you're using non-relational database, you should use embedded schemas, and we'll talk about what that is when we see Mongo. Use a Lucidchart or some other editor to create some UML class diagram. Here's some examples. The external web API, I already said that. One good place to start to find. Oh no, I don't remember the website. Oh, what was it called? All right. I'm sorry. There's a lot of repositories of nice URL, nice APIs that have lots of data that is already available. But most services today provide some type of some API, right? Most retailers provide APIs, but you have services for sports, for food, for entertainment. There's plenty of those. Google has tons of APIs that you can query and retrieve data. So choose an API. And I remember. It's one of them is programmable web. So programmable web is one of many repositories that you can search for any so food. So any domain will come back with there's like 185 APIs about food, right? So there's food to fork, food to you, Chicago food, USDA, and there's a whole bunch of them. So you can see all 185, or you can say sports, so there's 420 APIs for sports, Decathlon, Infostrata, sports data, sports fixtures, sports. So this is a good place to start with to find out what APIs are out there. There's some APIs provide data in XML, some provide in JSON, some in both. I would stick to JSON. It just makes it a little easier. Also, make sure that the API provides also not only JSON but JSON-P. JSON-P. So look for JSON-P. And or they support CORS, C-O-R-S, CORS. They support cross-origin requests, something I forget, which allows you to make invocations to their APIs from anywhere. So it allows access directly from a browser. If they don't allow access directly from a browser, you'll have to create a proxy server, and that it just makes it more complicated. So look for something that either supports JSON-P or supports CORS. Most APIs today do, but some of them don't. Right? I would start doing this now. The API part is somewhat the more challenging part of the project. You have to oftentimes you have to apply to get a private key. And you have to make sure that whatever API you're going to be using actually meets the requirements of the project. So the earlier you can make sure that that's the API that you're going to be using, the earlier you can get started. Okay. All right. Any questions? Yes. When I navigate to one particular user, I have to be able to have distinct user interfaces for them, and the use cases will be based on the domain objects. So each domain object will have all sorts of CRUD operations for that domain object, and that's going to drive whatever the use cases are. And so you'll have at least 2 domain objects. So you'll have CRUD operations for both of them from both of the users, right? Now some of the use cases might not make sense. For instance, faculties can create a course, whereas students can only read from the course. So some of them will have read access only, whereas some of them will have both. Write. Same thing if you're a buyer and a seller, right? I can modify products as logged in as a vendor, but I can only read them if I'm a consumer. So the products will drive whatever the use cases are, but they should have as broad a access to the object model as it makes sense for your particular role. Okay. Anything else?